Welcome to Inside American Politics by Skoob, the podcast that digs deep into the uncomfortable truths shaping American society. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're exploring one of the most persistent and destructive forces in our nation's history, xenophobia. Now, before you think this is just another academic discussion about prejudice, let me tell you something that might surprise you. The anti-Muslim sentiment we see today, it doesn't spike when you'd expect it to. Not after terrorist attacks, not after tragic events that dominate headlines. Instead, it surges like clockwork every 4 years, perfectly timed with presidential election cycles. This revelation comes from statistician Dalia Mogahed, who analyzed data spanning from September 11th to today. Her findings reveal something chilling. Xenophobia in America isn't just personal prejudice running wild in the streets. It's a calculated political weapon, sharpened and deployed when it's most useful for gaining power. Think about that for a moment. While we're told to fear the other, the real manipulation is happening in plain sight, disguised as patriotic rhetoric and national security concerns. This pattern isn't new. It's as American as apple pie, and it's been devastating communities for over a century. Let's start with the language itself, because words matter more than we realize. Within right-wing hate groups, and make no mistake, these groups have significant political influence, immigrants aren't called undocumented workers or even illegal immigrants. They're called aliens. This isn't accidental. The term alien does specific psychological work. It suggests these are beings from another world, fundamentally different from us, possibly subhuman. It's linguistic dehumanization at its finest, creating mental distance between real Americans and everyone else. But here's what's really happening beneath this rhetoric. Today's immigration patterns look dramatically different from the past. Earlier waves were predominantly European and white. Current immigrants? They're largely from Asia, South and Central America, people fleeing violence and poverty that, quite often, American foreign policy helped create. David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK and surprisingly influential political figure, frames this demographic shift as nothing short of civilizational collapse. He warns of America darkening like the Caribbean and Central America, as if having more melanin in your skin somehow corrupts the soil itself. Duke's commentary reveals the core anxiety driving modern xenophobia, the fear that white European male dominance in America is ending. And you know what? He's not entirely wrong about the demographic changes. Where he's catastrophically wrong is in suggesting this is somehow a bad thing. Now, let's talk about the economic argument, because this is where xenophobia gets really insidious. Hate activists claim immigrants are primarily welfare seekers and job thieves. In a country experiencing corporate downsizing and economic stagnation, this message finds fertile ground. When people are worried about paying rent, when they're watching factories close and wages stagnate, it's psychologically easier to blame the person who looks different than to examine complex global economic forces or corporate greed. Immigrants become convenient scapegoats for problems they didn't create. The National Association for the Advancement of White People, yes, that's a real organization, warns that immigration will make white people a vulnerable minority subject to the influence of blacks, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and Orientals. Their prediction? Increased crime, illiteracy, poor health care, and tyrannical governance under non-white leadership. This economic argument taps into real fears about job security, but it deliberately misdirects blame. Instead of questioning why corporations ship jobs overseas or why wages haven't kept up with productivity, it points the finger at desperate families seeking better lives. If you think this xenophobic playbook sounds familiar, you're absolutely right. Let me take you back to 1919, when America was reeling from World War I and facing economic uncertainty. President Wilson was incapacitated, leaving the country rudderless during a critical moment. Enter Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, a man whose name should be better known in American history. After an anarchist's bomb exploded at his residence, Palmer embarked on what can only be described as a xenophobic crusade. He presented Congress with a report dramatically titled, How the Department of Justice discovered upwards of 60,000 of these organized agitators of the Trotsky doctrine in the U.S. On January 1, 1920, in synchronized raids across the country, Palmer's agents rounded up over 6,000 immigrants. Many were deported without due process. This was the peak of the Red Scare, but it was really about something deeper, the fear that foreign ideas and foreign people were contaminating American purity. The legislative response was swift and brutal. The 1921 quota law restricted immigration to 3% of each nationality based on the 1910 census. But that wasn't enough. The 1924 Johnson-Reed Act reduced it further to 2% based on the 1890 census, essentially designed to keep out Southern and Eastern Europeans while completely banning Japanese immigration. Critics at the time recognized what was happening. Walter Lippmann wrote to Secretary of War Newton Baker, lamenting that an administration which had proclaimed unparalleled ideals had instead threatened fundamental American freedoms. H. L. Mencken accused the Justice Department of unprecedented espionage practices that rivaled those in Russia, Austria, and Italy. Sound familiar? The playbook hasn't changed much in over a century. Fast forward to today, and we see the same patterns playing out with new targets. According to FBI data from 2016, there were 6,121 official hate crime instances, with African Americans accounting for 2,220 victims. But here's what's crucial. While anti-Muslim sentiments have increased, the majority of racist violence still targets African Americans and Latinos. The post-Cold War era brought a new boogeyman, Islam. As the communist threat faded, fear of Muslim immigration filled the void in Western political discourse. The 1989 fatwa against Salman Rushdie, the subsequent protests and book burnings by Muslim migrants in Britain and Europe, provided perfect propaganda material for right-wing extremists warning of a Muslim peril. September 11th supercharged this narrative. Western countries responded by securitizing migration, blending counterterrorism with immigration policy. The Netherlands, for example, reinstated mandatory identification documents, something they had abolished after World War II because of its association with Nazi terror and the mass deportation of Jews. Think about that historical irony for a moment. Policies rejected because they facilitated genocide were brought back in the name of security. This brings us back to Dalia Mogahed's crucial discovery about the timing of anti-Muslim sentiment spikes. The pattern reveals that Islamophobia isn't an organic response to events. It's a manufactured political tool deployed strategically during presidential campaigns. Donald Trump didn't create Islamophobia, but he certainly weaponized it more blatantly than previous politicians. When he proposed a Muslim registry during his 2016 campaign, many Americans reacted with shock. What they didn't realize was that the Bush administration had already implemented a limited Muslim registry starting in 2002. This program, called Special Registration, put nearly 14,000 individuals from Muslim-majority countries into deportation proceedings. The result? 0 terrorism convictions. But it did succeed in terrorizing Muslim communities and demonstrating that discriminatory policies could be implemented with minimal public outcry. Trump's call for mosque surveillance similarly ignored that the FBI and NYPD had already been conducting extensive surveillance of mosques without sufficient probable cause. His December 2015 call for a complete ban on Muslims entering the United States wasn't entirely unprecedented either. Programs like CARP had already complicated processes for Muslims wishing to enter or stay in the country. 7 days after taking office, Trump fulfilled his campaign promise with a travel ban targeting 7 predominantly Muslim countries: Libya, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Here's what's particularly sinister about this list. Since 2001, all these countries had experienced either full-scale American military intervention or targeted bombings. As one observer noted, the bombs always precede the bans. This reveals the connection between American foreign military action and domestic immigration policies. We destabilize countries, create refugee crises, then ban the very people fleeing the chaos we helped create. The travel ban wasn't just policy, it was the inauguration of what could accurately be called the Islamophobia presidency. Trump had embraced Islamophobia not just as a campaign tactic, but as a governing philosophy. His proposed measures included a domestic surveillance strategy called Countering Islamic Violence, a registry for Muslim immigrants, and legal measures to undermine Muslim American organizations. Following Trump's rise in 2015, hate crimes against Muslims surged to levels not seen since 2001. The FBI reported a 67% increase in 2015 compared to the previous year, with another 20% rise in 2016. Violent assaults in 2016 actually exceeded the figures from 2001. But xenophobia isn't just about policy, it's about culture and identity. English-only initiatives, for example, promote an us versus them mentality where immigrant customs, traditions, and languages are ridiculed as gibberish, making English-speaking Americans feel like strangers in their own land. This cultural anxiety runs deep. Non-white, non-European immigrants are accused of contributing to the disintegration of American unity and stability. Their different appearances, customs, and languages are viewed as hastening the downfall of what extremists call the true white Christian identity. Radio shows like William Pierce's American Dissident Voices lament the post-World War II darkening of America, arguing that while European immigration was curtailed, immigration from the non-white world surged, leading to what they term a flood of Asians and mestizos. This rhetoric about browning or darkening America reveals the fundamentally racial nature of much anti-immigrant sentiment. It's not really about economics or security. It's about maintaining white demographic dominance. Here's what the xenophobes don't want you to know. Research consistently shows that the vast majority of Muslims don't endorse radical movements. Studies by Esposito and Mogahed, Keppel, Pargenter, and Roy all confirm this. Furthermore, European Muslims show strong support for democratic values, and research by Norris and Engelhardt demonstrates that Muslim migrants typically absorb significant aspects of their host culture over time. But facts don't matter when fear is the goal. Politicians and media continue to exacerbate fears, suggesting potential terrorists might infiltrate Western nations under the guise of asylum seekers. This narrative has gained considerable political momentum within nativist movements despite being contradicted by evidence. The good news is that racist violence has been met with resistance through anti-racist movements involving coalitions of minority organizations, trade unions, churches, and welfare agencies. These movements represent the better angels of American nature, the values we claim to hold dear. However, the persistence of racism continues largely because political figures seek electoral support by exploiting anti-immigrant or anti-Muslim narratives. These racist campaigns serve as significant factors in the formation of ethnic minority identities, ironically creating the very separatism and defensive reactions they claim to oppose. When communities are under attack, they naturally circle the wagons. This isolation can lead to self-organization, separatism, or in extreme cases, religious radicalization, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that feeds the xenophobic narrative. According to Statista's 2019 data, extremist attacks resulted in 49 deaths between 2000 and 2016. While this represents real tragedy, it's worth noting that you're statistically more likely to be struck by lightning than killed by a terrorist in America. Yet our policies and rhetoric suggest we're under constant siege. So what's really happening here? Xenophobia in America serves multiple functions for those in power. It distracts from economic inequality by providing scapegoats. It mobilizes voters through fear. It justifies expanded surveillance and security spending. And it maintains social hierarchies by keeping different groups of working people fighting each other instead of questioning why prosperity is increasingly concentrated at the top. The demographic changes that terrify xenophobes are real. America is becoming more diverse. But this isn't a crisis. It's an opportunity. Throughout our history, waves of immigrants have brought innovation, entrepreneurship, cultural richness, and renewed commitment to American ideals. What the hate groups call alien filth built our railroads, staffed our hospitals, started our businesses, and served in our military. They've been mayors, governors, senators, and Supreme Court justices. They've won Nobel Prizes, Olympic medals, and Academy Awards while waving American flags. We'll leave you with this. Xenophobia isn't inevitable. It's a choice shaped by politics, media, and fear of easy answers. But we can choose differently. We can see immigrants as people, not threats, question rhetoric that spikes when elections loom, and ask who profits from division. The next time fear is sold as protection, pause. What story isn't being told? And what truths are buried beneath the noise? Because the real picture is more complex, and far more revealing than it first appears. Curious about what we uncovered next, and the patterns that didn't make it into this episode? Download Skoob app now to get access to the full story and go deeper into the conversation.